Shahana. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you, Gary. And how are you?
I am doing and being very well in this moment. And thanks, everybody out there. You might be watching us live, watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or on Twitter as we're going live today, 3 o'clock UK time on the 26th of July. And we're going to go exploring again today. And we've got two more incredible guests, Johanna. And I'd love to, see where are you at the moment? And maybe do you mind sharing with us a frame for today's beautiful exploration?
Thank you, Gary. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Donna and Zena and the collective dreaming that we are going to step into, collective imagining. But just to set the context for our campfires and what we are um, dreaming about, as we step into these conversations. Just a bit of an intro for everyone listening out there, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, whoever is listening in to us. So, as we know, 4 billion years of evolution later, we are at a cusp, a point of transition, the great turning, and we are nearing planetary collapse. Species are vanishing at an alarming rate. Obviously, it's evident to everyone now that the narrative running the show is no longer making sense. And we have to collectively weave new narratives, multiple narratives that reflect the many truths of a spectacularly diverse and abandoned planet. Stories that spring from realities beyond the human, more than human, and unshackled from the old machine metaphor of organizations. We would like to dream and reimagine organizations as living systems, spaces for thriving and flourishing, healing systems that can bring life back to this planet, that can heal the planet and our planetary world. They are, let us imagine organizations as imaginal cells carrying the codes of the metamorphosis of the future. And organizations that dare to break free of the matrix, the old matrix, become weavers and wayfinders of planetary healing and make emergent future possible. So, as heralds of the new narratives, how would we imagine, dream organizations to function? What would such organizations feel like? And what would be the operating principles, the new OS of healing organizations, of the future organizations? So, welcome everyone to this conversation of collective dreaming together. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Shahana. It's so beautiful and poetic and inviting for every single one of us. So let's bring on Donna and also Zaina into the conversation. How are you both? Let's start with Donna. Maybe we'll go into a little round just to check in. So let people know, Donna, who you are, what you're up to, and then we'll go to Zaina. And then we'll go into some free flow after that. Thanks very much.
Thank you both. Thank you, Shauna, for a beautiful intro. A couple of words there strike me, one of which is healing, the biggest one. That's the one I think that resonates. I have been working in the field of basically reconnecting our decision-making back to caring about people and planet, and particularly the ecology of the wider system that supports us all for a long, long time. We won't say how long, but for a long time. And now I'm doing it through the lens of decision making. And right now, putting together a program called Adaptive Decision Making, which is a way of adapting how we make our decisions to take into account both the context that's changed, because some people actually don't think it has changed, but in a way in which you can actually use those deeper skills that everybody has. So that's the focus that I have at the moment. And I'm delighted to be here and explore with all of you.
Thanks.
Tina, over to you.
Hi. Gosh, how long have I been exploring this? A bit like Dana. It feels like forever. Actually, I think my kind of career started at the police, and so that's very much kind of the life and death sharp edge of kind of and working mostly with the shadow side of the systems. And the breakdown of them and the trauma, really. I think that I didn't realize how much our societies were traumatized. So, you know, I very much kind of connect with Donna when she talks about the healing. And I think kind of moving away from this kind of sense of the polarities of right and wrong and everything else, and starting to actually understand a much deeper aspect of what's going on in the world in terms of how do we get here. I think for me, finding the connection of the ancestral traumas that we've been through, the wars, you know, the colonizations and all those kind of things, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, and how that lives on in us in the way through trauma we've survived those things by creating patterns, and that the way that we're operating, and how challenging that is to change patterns and change. I mean, we talk about changing our thinking, but I think for me it's much more kind of, we've been actually programmed, if you like, from such a deep cellular level to be able to survive in the systems that operate into which we were born into. So I think that's where my interest lies, in terms of how do we, you know, work with a much more conscious sense of what's happened, where our connections are into those systems, and what perhaps we're being loyal to that we don't realize, in order to belong. So that's been my exploration. That's the, you know, I have an personal interest in supporting kind of executive coaches and leaders who want to reimagine, rethink work and the way that they operate in the world and the way that they lead, but also doing things, you know, not just thinking about kind of organizations, but also thinking about societies and communities as well.
Beautiful. Shahana, I'd love for you to express a bit more about what you're focusing on at the moment. It'd be lovely to hear that. Then I'll chip in and then we'll go into a bit of open flow from there. It'd be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna and Zena. What both of y'all said so deeply resonated with me. And it's kind of strange that we are literally kind of worlds apart in our geographical locations, but we have arrived kind of at a similar point through kind of similar journeys. When I say similar, I mean, I was part of the corporate world, and I say was, I still am in a very different way, but I was part of the regular corporate world, and it felt to me so, you know, like Donna said, like Zena said, so traumatized, so broken, so so almost like not only the machine metaphor, but people within, apart from being cogs and human resources, even the topmost guy, even the CEOs, the people with so-called the power, they all felt to me as if undergoing some kind of traumatizing experience. And the more I kind of, you know, try to step back and see from just a, you know, observer's lens, it felt like Zena was saying that the patterns of the system, the very patterns are trapping people into a kind of into modes, into these structures, into modes that they don't want to be in, but they find no way out, like the Matrix. You're in it, and you are in it, and you see it everywhere, but you don't know that it's the Matrix that you're caught with, and you don't know how to get out of it. You don't know there is something beyond it. And even when people think or imagine or hope there is something beyond it, just trying to reimagine from the ground up something so very different feels so often so challenging. So in the face of the current, current context, feels so challenging, such an uphill task, often so very lonely, that people give up. They just go with the flow, and going with the flow in this case creates more trauma, more traumatized brokenness. And the more I thought about that, I stepped into coaching, and I became a certified coach. Not only because I wanted to be a coach, I wanted to be one, but also to understand how to myself and how do we get closer to people without directing them and instructing them and commanding them and controlling them and putting them in this, matrix of boxes and organization charts. What what drives people? Really drives people. Really, I mean, I refused to believe that people get up in the morning and rush to office to create more value for shareholders. And that ceased to enchant me very early on in my corporate phase. And I've always been in the organization design and development and L&D space as head of L&D and coach and facilitator. So for me, it was all about how do we unfurl people's potential, just like you have a bud unfurling. Can't people unfurl to their fullest potential in the right conditions with the right nurturing? And wouldn't that be the work of leaders rather than to command and control and squeeze every ounce of productivity out of an ever diminishing, ever decreasing workforce? And the more I thought about these, I felt it was right that I should step out of the corporate and work on the fringe of the corporate and see which are those organizations that I could partner with, that I could and not come in as a consultant and as an expert, but as a fellow journeyman, as a fellow traveler, and partner with organizations that wanted to traverse a different path. And that's what I've been exploring outside of the organization for the last 6-7 years. And that's how I met Gary. That's how I'm meeting y'all. And I'm immensely delighted that our tribe is growing. Our tribe increases. So here we are. And thank you.
Thank you, Shahana. I just want to check. Thank you, Joe, for joining us. She's just shared a couple of really lovely, caught a couple of points you shared, Shahana, around being lonely and creating the conditions. Like, this is so fascinating for me. So for my side, why do I care about this stuff? Why am I so grateful to be with these three amazing humans today? Is I still work in the chemicals industry. Some people know that, some people don't know that. If you want to look at a trauma industry, like look at that one, right? The whole macho, hyper masculine, growth at all costs, acquire, M&A, every bit of language and war metaphor is on fire within that industry. However, taking what each of you have shared, it's definitely an entanglement, and Zaina speaks to you so beautifully as well. Like, I know from working inside of the industry how much pain is there, how much self-worth is being attached to the job. Keeping the kids in private school. What if I don't get the next bonus? I promised the kids the holiday. These things seem so insignificant on the one level, but on a macro level, if you've got the majority of business as we know it, driven by that energy, we can see where the entanglement and the challenge and trauma comes from. Even if they are not aware, the system knows very well, but if they're not aware of their role within that, that's the invitation, I think, today is this reimagining, right? How do we reimagine breaking those patterns? What can each of us actually do for ourselves and for one another to start to break those patterns? But I guess the first thing, and I'm going to throw the first seed in for today's conversation, if I may, is how do people even spot the patterns in themselves and around them? What do they need to be doing, thinking, feeling, questioning? So that's where I'd like to seed us, if I may, and we'll see where we pop after that. But how do people start to see those patterns for themselves? I'm curious.
You want to lob that to you want to lob it to anybody in particular?
We'll find our way.
Yeah, my first thought as a professional facilitator, having worked with teams and organizations right across the spectrum of topics, from policy to arts and culture to engineering and road design and the road maintenance. We're all human. That's the fundamental of it, and we all have patterns. It doesn't matter whether it's parking in the same place over and over again, or whatever it is. There's patterns provide us a level of stability, and from a neuroscience point of view, that's the same for decisions. So in terms of pattern spotting, we were talking about what Dan was doing earlier before the broadcast started. What can people do? One of the things that is a holding pattern is the analytical approach to everything, to reduce, and we're well trained in it. We actually, there's not much that trains you to be otherwise. So it's a complete shift in perspective. I call it zooming out. I think John Hagel uses that term too, but I'm not sure it's precisely in the same manner as I meant, because for me, it's more of a eagle point of view, if you will, just getting a high level view of where am I, who am I in this context I'm in, and what do I want to do with it? Because that's, Shahana, you saw that. You could see yourself in this gerbil spinning thing and go, whoa, wait a minute. And Gary, you've seen it too. And you know, different choices emerge. And that's it. There's nothing judgmental around that. It's just to observe, I'm in this pattern. What do I want to do with this? How can I use it? And of course, that's why I frankly got excited about the pandemic, because it broke every pattern. And it gave a huge opportunity for companies, for people in their home lives to reconnect with what matters, to reconnect with their values. So my short answer would be use any interruption that you can to rethink and invent in the moment what it is that you want to be doing with your life, and how it is you want to be putting yourself forward. I think it's one of my favorite quotes. I've got a few of them, but one of them is Joseph Chilton Pierce saying, "We have within us a deep creative talent that is only released under the conditions of adversity. When the going gets really tough, that's when we don't get desperate, like many decision makers did, which was really sad. We don't get desperate. We get more creative about how we do it in a way that benefits planet, people, social cohesion, and all that." So that's precisely what tilted me toward the adaptive decision making, was to start tilting these difficult places into opportunities for expansion. So that's a bit of a long answer, but the short answer would be being aware, getting a shifting perspective is transformative.
You mentioned the pandemic, Donna, and yes, of course, when it happened, especially when it hit a country like India, which is overpopulated, which is healthcare infrastructure isn't really what it should be, and there's chaos on one side, but on the other, and I'm one of the privileged people who could sort of shelter in place. I must admit that I could withdraw into my cocoon, safe haven, shelter. So as the world kind of came to the pause, I thought of it as a great pause, and there was this hope, at least, and I think many people like us hoped that it would force governments and organizations and leaders and even people like us to really rethink and every choice that we make and have made so far, and how our choices have brought us to this point, to this cusp. And there was, on this other hand, what I noticed as I spoke to my friends and past colleagues, ex-colleagues within organizations and outside, there was also this desperate desire to get back to business as usual, to get back to the old normal, if you will. And I kept asking myself and anyone who would listen, that was the normal really normal? What had we normalized? What had we accepted as normal that made us want to get back to it? Or was it, like you just said, was it just the familiarity of patterns known? Never mind, what those patterns, where those patterns landed us in. But at least they were known patterns, the known devils. So it was almost like us yearning to get back to BAU, the old normal, because our imagination was failing us to, or rather, we were not using our imagination I wouldn't say creatively, but we want using our imagination courageously enough to really rethink the old. So we were kind of grasping at what had happened before the pandemic and wanting to get back there. I saw many organizations struggling for that, again struggling with productivity, struggling with the same paradigms of profit and same paradigms of lean organization, and the same, and become even more command and control, in spite of Zoom, using all kinds of algorithmic measures to keep track of people. And I was just so disappointed on one hand, and I also found that on this simultaneously people who saw this pandemic as a sign of break, as a point of discontinuity, and were willing to step into this void, this liminal space of the unknown. And those are the people I think we are coming together now to sort of swim in the void, to stay in the liminal space. And that's what gives me, I would say, joy, hope, and willingness to step into more and more such conversations.
Yeah, it's well said. I mean, first of all, the run backwards is a indication of the tension between certainty and uncertainty. You know, if I'm absolutely confident or if I feel safe in certainty, then uncertainty looks like a threat. But if your security is bound within, if you have trust in yourself and your capabilities, then uncertainty is just a new frontier. It's not anything. It's not an enemy. It's not a threat. It's the opportunity. And so without that tension between certainty and uncertainty, there is no growth. There's stagnation. And I think some of what you're absolutely, that observation around running backwards was really tragic, because there was so much that could have been done. I mean, the innovation tweaks, like more was done in 7 months than happened in 7 years was the summation of that experience. And then it kind of dropped back to BAU, business as normal, business as usual. And we lost that edge. And I think that's the edge we have to keep, is that uncertainty is not a threat. It's the opportunity to really grow and expand into new possibilities that we actually don't, we've got so much work to do on supporting this planet and continuing to support us, for one. We have a lot to do to repair the social dissonance that took place, regardless of which government, regardless of the decisions, but just that confidence in governments that are actually not very capable of making decisions on these kinds of issues. So I think the third thing that comes to my mind is that organizations, for the most part, have been trained to look backwards. They look backwards for budgeting is a backwards focus. There's a whole lot of processes and practices in companies that are focused on the running backwards, and yet, in order for us to use bifurcation, in order for us to use the gaps, the breaking of the patterns, you have to be focused on ahead. You have to be looking at, what do I want to do? How do I want to create using this break in the patterns? How can we use that to become better, both at being humans at a personal level and at a company level, to serve a much higher purpose than just making money? How can we regenerate our natural systems? How can we regenerate our internal workplaces so that they are actually human and don't treat people as resources, but see people as fundamental contributors to the future, the formation of the co-creation, essentially, of the future, to use a term that people, I think, for the most part, are familiar with.
And I think for me, it's about being curious about ourselves as well. I think, when I first kind of noticed a very significant pattern in the leaders I was working with, and it would have been probably about 2004 or something like that, I think. And I started to notice, because I worked in change, that they seem to get to a threshold of of what I would say transformation, and then they diverted off into something else. So they would leave the organization and go and set up somewhere else, or they would do something that would mean that they wouldn't wouldn't go through the transformation. They would stop at change and not go through transformation. So, you know, when we were at that edge of culture change, when we were really, you know, we'd kind of put all the foundations in place for that culture change, and then they wouldn't. And I was started to get really curious about that and noticing it as a pattern, because I think that's the first thing, is noticing the patterns, isn't it? And I think for me, you know, we see some patterns that we think are normal, like, you know, I get up every morning and I do the same things. But what about the hidden patterns? It's the hidden patterns, I think, that are really interesting. And those hidden patterns we can't consciously conjure up. Even if, as we sat here today, there are patterns within us that we don't know yet. We don't know they exist. We don't know where they show up. So I was curious about that, and I kind of went on a bit of an exploration. But one of the first things that I did, and I think this is trying to answer your question, Gary, about how do we work with those patterns, is not my first intention is not to break patterns, but to be curious about the pattern. So again, and that's just kind of holding it more lightly and being curious about what those patterns might look like. And the first thing that I started to wonder what my patterns were, having kind of watched these leaders, thinking, well, what I can see theirs, what may be mine. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but what I actually did was set up what I call a sacred container. What that looked like for me, and that could be different for different people, was to actually was to take time, an hour every morning, every single morning, as much as I could at the same time. So really early in the morning, to just sit with a pen and a piece of paper and write 3 pages of what I was aware of. So just kind of, you know, free writing what I was becoming consciously aware of. But as I noticed, as I kind of got into that as a rhythm, I started to notice that that random things emerged, songs, you know, music, images, clips from films. I mean, all sorts of different things. And instead of kind of pushing them away as like irrelevant, because I'd got that space, I started to note them down without trying to work out what they were. And what I didn't understand at that point, which I understand now, is I was working with a deeper felt sense, because it was that part of my brain, if you like, the metaphoric creative imagination that was sending me messages of where to look, where to go exploring. And I just explored them. So if a film came in my awareness, I would buy the film, watch the film with no intention of watching it as a kind of in a conscious way, but just being in the film and just again noticing what I was noticing around the film. And even though some of those films may be films I'd seen before, I started to notice there were things about that film I'd not seen before, maybe hidden narratives in them, and I started to try and understand what the meaning might be without analysing it. And suddenly I started to see these patterns then kind of emerging and noticing things that were not just in me, but noticing what was going on around me as well, and the way people were interacting with me and with other people. So suddenly this curiosity and you know, speak to Donna stuff about that zooming out was happening. You know, instead of kind of living life in a kind of in with it all that was happening, there was a part of me, you know, there was a part of me that was still doing that, but there was also a part of me that was stepping away going, what's going on there then? And the curiosity kind of really started to build without noticing sometimes the judgment and starting to work more with, I'm not going to judge that, I'm just going to observe it, I'm just going to watch it. And then those patterns that I've started to curious about, perhaps where did those patterns emerge from? And things that became less, those patterns I became less identified with those patterns, if that makes sense. There was a separation. So I could actually start to see them and then see the possibilities. So when something new was emerging, instead of kind of going down an automatic route that I would have normally gone down before, I was starting to kind of go, well, I could go down that route, but I can actually see more routes now. There was, it kind of gave me more perspective and more options. And then we were into risk taking. Well, I wonder what might happen if I go down a different road, and what that might look like, and things then start to to open up in a different way. What it does mean, and I think this is why people are often very frightened, is we start to then kind of have to make those sacrifices, where sometimes we have to, those relationships that were connected to that pattern, because it's not just our patterns, it's the relationships that were connected to them, we're starting to maybe become difficult. So some relationships ended. Some very close relationships ended. And that's often the painful thing, that when we're changing patterns, we have to make sacrifices around what we're now going to be loyal to, because suddenly we're becoming more consciously aware of what, embodying our values and what we believe in at a heart level, rather than fitting in and belonging. So, but we are risking our belonging by doing that in those places, and that can have a profound effect. And so, speaking to what Gary's talking about in terms of organizations, these people who are leaders of these organizations are in those networks of social networks that they belong to. And if they start changing, if they start disentangling from some of these systems, they're going to risk their belonging. And so then there's a challenge and that happens as to whether they're going to do that, because obviously we can catastrophize about what that might look like, and we might lose our family, we might lose our friends, we might lose our children, we might lose that. That's the fear that kind of kicks in, that then keeps people stuck. Is what I observe. But if we do it very gradually, very gently, it still gives us the options of manoeuvring, thinking, well, do I not want to go down that road and change that pattern, but I'll disentangle here. It just gives us much more control over those patterns and the disentangling of them.
Gary.
You three blow my mind. That's all I'm going to say. I hope you're getting some value today, people watching live or watching back. It just blows my mind, because I'm one of those people where I feel I'm like, my feminine energy tends to lead over my masculine energy, although we have both, right? My immediate reaction still within the corporate space is a defense mechanism. I tend to kick into the masculine energy to survive. It's like, no, you need to be this, you need to be competing, you need to be growing business, you need to be taking this. And then I sit in the space like this and I'm going, but this is where, as we spoke yesterday, Zaina, my heart is in this space of healing and connection and facilitating us reconnecting to ourselves, right? And I think that's what's really coming up for me, is the invitation so far in this first 30 minutes to get really, really curious. Like, if the world doesn't look or feel like you'd really love it to, why is that? Is it the job? Is it your feelings? Is it the patterns of behavior? But I just think just that really simple little invitation, just to get curious about your immediate 6 square feet around you. Because I'm the first person, as you three know, to get lost in the big picture and systemic and racism and decolonization, and that's all important, and it is. But I'm so clear that the more of us that come together, like the 4 of us and all of you today, with this healthy, exploratory, curious dialogue, that's going to ripple like crazy really, really quickly. And we don't have these ripples, and this is what's coming up for me powerfully. Where are those ripples of this type of invitation? Like in the mainstream or across, like they're happening, right? We see them all over the place, but how do they join? It's almost like, how do you get those streams of consciousness, of awareness, of curiosity? How do those streams find one another to turn into like the ocean? That's what I'm sitting in this moment as a metaphor in terms of the potentiality. Yeah, it's blows my mind, Shahana. Blows my mind.
Mine too.
Beautiful.
And beautiful. And you know what came up when Zina was sharing her experience of the morning pages, that this is a practice that's on the one hand, that's like she said, a sacred container for the self, but also on the other hand, a practice that anyone can pick up, a leader, a CEO, or anyone. It's like, it's almost like observing, or rather noticing what I'm noticing. And as I do that more and more, and like she said, what was coming up is this is one of the practices, and listeners out there, that each one of us can do as we notice our own noticings. We kind of sense our own patterns, and then we are also able to sense the patterns that exist in the larger system and hold it gently, hold the system and ourselves gently. And then we move from us versus them, I versus system, you know, the problem out there versus I'm not the problem, to noticing that there are patterns I'm part of, there are patterns that I've unconsciously helped to propagate, and there are patterns that either I'm part of because it helps me to fit in, it helps me to belong, or I've just not noticed it before. And the more I notice my noticings, I think what it does is, if each one of us shift as individuals, the system gradually shifts. The system is not this thing out there waiting to be moved. It is us. And as each one of us holds space for ourselves and others differently, we help collectively, we are moving the system. And, like Donna was saying, everything in organizations is typically backward looking. Training is based on past best practices. Learning about, SOPs and all kinds of stuff. That is all past best practices. But what if we held space for emergent learning? What if we held space for generative learning through such conversations within organizations? Consciously holding space, creating these containers. And what if leaders could become facilitative stewards? And what would that feel like? What would that look like? What would such organizations be like? Would they be more agile? Would they be more disruptive in the I'm not saying disrupt for the sake of disruption, but disruptive of their own patterns in a way that heals them and heals their community and the societies around them? I'm just thinking aloud, kind of riffing off what Zina was saying and Donna said. But yeah, I think noticing our own patterns, because that's how I started, like 7, 8, 10 years ago with morning pages, and that led me to actually leave the corporate world, walk out of it, but still empathize with the corporate in the sense it's a story that's currently running the show. Humans created the story, and humans can change the story. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is disturbing at this moment is snap judgments. So a simple practice would be to take a snap judgment and that noticing you're doing it is the first step one. It's like notice, wait a second, and flip it into a question. And that changes the stance from I think I know everything there is to know in the moment to I don't know everything there is to know in the moment, and I'm here to learn. And that's a very powerful reorientation that allows you to create with something with yourself in that moment, to create the edge, if you will, and get out of the, stretch that 4% as Stephen Kotler talks about in flow states. Just push the elastic enough that you can move into a different way of seeing yourself, being in yourself, and advancing into a different perspective that allows you to be way more comfortable with the kind of chaotic moments that we had in the last couple of years. Not just be comfortable with them, in other words, be at peace with them, but also to create with them, create something better. I mean, one of the things that bothers me is that, and I know this from 9 years of being homeless, is that you sort of think you've got to get desperate in order to survive. We got to put meal on the table. We got to blah blah blah. That survival thing. We've got to survive at any cost. And one of the things I observed in my stretch of reinvention, if you will, reimagining, is that no, you don't have to be desperate. You can actually be creative, and in a good way, not in an unethical way, because some of the creative strategies are also unethical. but in a way in which, you know, you honor the place who you are and your place in the wider world, but also the people around you, the nature, all of, you know, and we hear so much talk about people finding home in nature and being at home, and I'm one of them, obviously. But the other part of it is that we're destroying it at a rapid rate. So which one do we want? And can we bring those into alignment and make a difference there? And so this is where I think companies can make a huge difference. But we have to reconnect first. So it's just that pivotal moment of observe and then switch. You know, observe, switch strategies. I observe, I'm making a snap judgment. I'm going to ask a question instead. And that gets rid of fear in a heartbeat, because it's shifted the stance quite powerfully. So I think that's one of the most important simple practices that that makes sense to me at this point in time. I mean, you don't have to disrupt the patterns. They're being disrupted all the time. That's the beauty of it. It's just working with them as such. People got, you know, they lose things, they lose relationships, break down. Some relationships are just passing through. Like, so there's just something, you make a connection and then that person goes off and they may come back, you don't know, but it's there. Everyone has a little gift they give in that connection. So I think there's so much beauty in this process that it's sort of, you know, that really well said point about observing and noticing is one that allows you to be very present with the next decision you make, knowing that that's going to create the future.
Trying to think of that Rumi quote as well. Is it beyond the field of right and wrong, I'll meet you there. Though,
yeah,
it's that, because I think, and you know, I notice in myself when I'm talking about patterns, I'm often thinking about patterns as a negative thing instead of just as a pattern. It's just a pattern. So you know, in my experience, patterns have some patterns have emerged because I've been in a survival situation, because I've been in a traumatic situation where I've had to, you know, in order to survive, I've had to do something, but then it's become a habit, you know, because if you like, the trauma's not actually been healed. You know, I wasn't put back into a you know, a safe, contained place after the trauma. So you know, yes, there are some patterns that, you know, served me then but don't serve me now. But I think it's about valuing those, all patterns, whatever those patterns are, to start with, so we don't judge them and just kind of notice them. And again, I think, you know, that's what Donna's saying, is, but it's like just stopping that judgment. You know, it's so easy for us to judge, and that in itself can be a pattern if it's the polarity pattern of right or wrong or whatever. But just kind of going beyond that, because I think that's where that we live at the moment, in a very strong culture of division. You know, are you this or are you that? You know, we found that in the pandemic. You know, are you one of those or are you one of these? And it's like, what if you're not one of any of those? You know, so it's challenging if you don't live in the polarity world, because then everybody's like looking at you. You know, you have that tumbleweed moment where they're confused, really confused. Because again, that's another place, isn't it? We hate being confused, but if we allow ourselves to be confused, you know, just to allow that confusion, because in a transformation, confusion is part of the transformation. You know, working with confusion rather than that feel that I need to get to certainty as fast as possible. It's like, actually, you know, we're in confusion. If any leader, you know, stands up now and says we know where we're going, then they're lying because we're confused right now. You know, because if you like, we're at the edge of a civilization collapse. You know, we're at the end of it. So we don't know yet what this new civilization may look like. We're imagining it. That's the whole point. As humans, we need to reimagine it. And that's where we need to come together to reimagine, rather than kind of sit, you know, try and kind of crit. And I, you know, I noticed that obviously we all get entangled in this kind of wanting to criticize, but actually, you know, what that's just going to do is help us stay in the same entanglement. for me, it's about kind of, honoring what is, whatever that is, just honoring what is. So if we accept the world as it is right now, it gives us much more freedom to reimagine what we'd like to do. It gives us more energy. Whereas if all our energy is in fighting the old, then that's where our energy is going, isn't it? In fighting those things. And I still feel like a lot of people are still caught in that fighting the system. People who want to something new, but instead of kind of acknowledging what is, they're putting all their effort into fighting the old system. And actually, it's about let's reimagine it. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed is humor is a big part of that. Just let's start using some humor, because that it just kind of helps release, that feeling of powerlessness and that feeling of not being able to move forward. There's something about a lightness and a humor, not in a dismissive way, but in a kind of in a way that releases the tension, so we can start to, because that's part of play and imagination, isn't it, as well? It allows us to kind of release ourselves to open ourselves up to different possibilities.
Yeah, I've noticed that George Carlin is making a big comeback in there's been a lot of him, and it's his irreverence that I believe captures the sentiments of a lot of people. It's just like he's just got this lovely way of being completely irreverent. And I think that attitude isn't a bad idea when it comes to old systems that are really making doing more harm than good in a whole lot of ways. It could be argued are doing a whole lot more harm than good. So it's just that moment where we don't believe that this person or that particular expert has the answers, that the answers we have to kind of blend, ask our questions, look at the expertise, look at what's around us, and then make a decision accordingly. I think that's where I totally, the humor side of it is huge, because that's where you get the objectivity. You can't have humor without some level of objectivity, emotional objectivity toward the situation. And there's a lot of power in that, in the sense that it gives you the capacity to set aside your emotions for the moment and just appreciate the moment. And that I think is very reassuring in a way.
And release the fear, isn't it, Donna, as well? I mean, we need
tension.
This is a scary place. This is an extremely scary, to be on a planet that's dying and that's being destroyed, and as an individual, the feeling of powerlessness and that is a really scary place. So I think kind of humor allows us to kind of go beyond the fear in a way, and find, energy, a different kind of energy, to connect again with other people, and to release, some of that energy, that nervous energy, that fearful energy as well, because that's part of the survival aspect, isn't it? The fear often makes us cling on instead of let go. We want to cling on in fear. We want to grab hold of instead of surrender.
Yeah, fear and uncertainty are quite entangled in that sense. It's just, I remember facilitating a group of doctors way back many years ago now, when the sector was changing here, and then there was a bit, and one of the doctors said, "Can you just tell me when the sands of change will quit shifting?" And I thought, wow, I can't. No. It's sort of like one of those, get used to it. Here we are. And this was a minor shift. So it sort of speaks to, the degree to which people we all rely on, to a degree at least, our external surroundings for that security, when the real security is found within. It's found within your capacity to observe, noticing, as you said earlier, just to work with that as a in a non-judgmental way, because if you start judging it, well, you're going to lean one way or the other, and it's that's how polarities get worse rather than better, or get used effectively. So I think we're in a moment where we create the future. That's, yes, we're on a dying planet, but there's a whole lot of things that we can do that make the world better, And I think the sooner we start sort of just focusing on that and using that crash and the bifurcation, that co-creative ditch, if you will, to collectively work together to reinvent what we really want in the world. That's the opportune moment. That's what we've got going on here. And I think in my world, at least, and I think that's extremely exciting. We can do a lot of simple stuff that takes us out of, that uses trauma, actually, to go back to how we started this conversation, but it uses that tough stuff to get into a much stronger and better relationship within ourselves and within to the world itself as well. So I think that's a big part of what we can do with these moments. Otherwise, this mental health disaster that's going on worldwide isn't going to get better. It's a redirecting of that energy and of that focus to more of a creative process and state. Gary,
we love a bit of silence, don't we, Shahana? To be honest.
Yep. Taking in everything, absorbing.
I think there's something for me which is I appreciate and I think what's hopefully being modelled for you if you're watching this live or listening to this back, watching it back. What I'm appreciating in each of us today is the ability and willingness to hold that seeming paradox, right? Civilizational and maybe ecological collapse, and reimagining and fun and levity. Like, we're not conditioned to hold that space, right? We're conditioned to go one way or the other. That's one of those patterns. And I'm hoping we're modeling it's okay to get curious, be fun, have a laugh while trying to solve the challenges within ourselves and outside. And I just wanted to sort of spot that. I'm noticing that beautiful handing off to one another in this exploration today around it's okay to be concerned and look forward and create. And I just think that's coming up very powerfully for me today.
If I speak to it from a consciousness point of view, one of the things that dominates is duality. You know, it's either or. And the third point is it's a unified state. And that's what we're working toward now, is to see how can we take these polarities and use them to come together on a higher goal, which could be the restoration and regeneration of the planet, of our relationship with species, biodiversity. There's so many layers that small steps make big differences. And so I think that's a big part of what you've just described, Gary, is using this state, this liminal state, and Shahana, you've mentioned that as well, for co-creation. We're in it. Let's use it. Now, of course, the part that goes with that is it takes a lot more courage to step into that zone, the tensions between the polarities, than it does to join one of them and point your fingers at somebody else. It takes much more courage to do that. It takes a lot of moxie, but it also takes vision. And I think the other part of this process is and I'm a process nerd, you can tell, but the other part of this process is, instead of, sort of looking back on, gee, we wish things were the way they were, and, that fatal attraction to the past, the old normal, as it were, is that redirection of focus and stepping into having the courage to step in. Because I remember hearing a conversation, I think it was Brad Pitt was talking about being an actor, and what he said was, when you dive deeply into, in his case, his character, read it as yourself, you don't know what's going to come out when you're in the moment. You don't know what part will, and I think that's the undiscovered, unexplored part of human potential and human creative talent. We're not sure what we're capable of fundamentally. And there's a whole lot that we're capable of that doesn't look like destruction. I mean, I think we've really mastered the art of destruction quite well. I think now we get to to focus on co-creation and more of a cooperative, collaborative, whatever words you want to use. But it's I've called them C words. I've got a lot of C words that I work with. But it's just that idea of shifting our orientation toward being better in and for the world. That's what we're here for at this point in consciousness.
I remember reading a quite a long time ago now, work around courage, and I remember they talked about the word courage means heart. French. And the original usage of the word meant to speak wholeheartedly. So to speak your heart, or to put your heart on the line by sharing it openly and embracing all of the vulnerability of that for the purpose of true, authentic, heartfelt expression and connection. And I think kind of, coming from the heart in today's climate is a rebellious act, isn't it? That's another thing that they talked about. I think I'm trying to think who it was who said this. I think it can't remember. It was I remember a lady who I came across who'd written an absolute beautiful website called the IVC, and she talks about the need for courage in today's world, and but relating it to the heart. And I thought that was a really beautiful way of looking at the world with everything that was going on.
It is, and I recall when I was facilitating something, there's this list of actions. Let me put it this way. I'll just reverse that comment for a moment. Any company that is wondering why it's got lots of action ideas and they're not getting implemented, it's because of the heart. The heart is, there's no, is it half-hearted? Is it full-hearted? Or is there absolutely no energy behind it? And those will be the ones where they've got a long list of to-dos and they can't understand why they're not being implemented. And it's like, well, you haven't got heart in them. There's no connection between why would I put my energy and effort into that. If I don't, there has to be reciprocity. Otherwise you get burnout. People, that's where that comes from. It's just too much heart given and not enough restored. It's energetically speaking through that lens. So, that heart conversation is a big part of why are some things getting implemented and other things not. Why are people engaged and not? There's so many layers organizationally and societally that can center around where's the heart energy, what's the dial, on the on that.
Yeah, and just even, I suppose, asking that question is how much is your heart connected to this? Because I think it's a very courageous thing to be able to be clear about saying, actually, no, my heart's not in this anymore. My heart's not, or I've not, no, I'm not. Because I think we kind of feel that that's a bad thing. That's where the perpetrator pattern comes in, where we might be, seen as being, that's a bad thing. And it's like, actually, it's a courageous thing. And actually, it's a good thing if someone's being really honest about that. And I just wanted to shout out, remember the lady's name, it's Jamie Walters. I don't know whether you've heard of her, Donna. She's and she wrote a book for all those kind of budding entrepreneurs out there, which was Small Business, Big Vision. It's a really beautiful book. So yeah, I think kind of being honest about that, and I think a lot of people don't know whether the heart's, because we don't really work with the heart, do we? We're all very much in the head. We don't work with the heart, and yet if we do, things really do shift and change.
Yeah,
it's the fuel. Period. Yeah. Gary.
Shahana, I think we're going into our beautiful wrap up and check. That's 55 human minutes.
Not aardvark minutes. Not armadillo minutes.
Well, we know time's a made up construct, right? But based on what we've been taught, 55 minutes is pretty quick. Like, where's that gone? So
I
I'd
know.
love to invite sort of check out, if we may, just do a round of checking out. How are we feeling? What have we taken away? What have we been reminded of? Anything that comes to your heart or mind as we check out. And thank you anyone that's stayed with us. I think a few people have. And yeah, let's maybe start, if I may, with Zaina, Donna, Shahana, then myself, and then yeah, just love to hear your thoughts and what you're taking away, how you're feeling, what's going on for you. Cheers, Zaina.
Well, I always love your invitations to do these things, Gary. I just think it's fabulous. And that's because your heart's in it. That's why. So, yeah, so it's so easy to show up to the stuff that you do because your heart's in it. And so it's not just coming from your mind or your analytical space. So yeah, I've really enjoyed meeting Donna for the first time. We've had a bit of a conversation over text, but it's been lovely to meet you. And yeah, I think for me the takeaway is kind of working with those patterns. Working from the heart and having some kind of practice to find out what those hidden patterns might be that are keeping us entangled in these systems that feel painful.
Sorry, is it Shahana?
It's you.
Oh,
You go.
oops. So what I really appreciate is that we started a conversation around trauma, which sort of had a pit in the stomach feel to it initially, but the arc has been to arrive at a place where we can use, we can all use this work, this experience for a co-creative, for a creative purpose. At least that's how I would craft it if I were writing the story. And I'm really delighted to have this conversation with all of you, because I think more of these conversations need to happen. I'd love to see these happen in the C-suite. I'd love to see these happen across this, like a mixed up thing where you get people across the organization having conversations, because systems drive patterns, and patterns sustain the systems that they're in. And from a business point of view, where there's a lot of damage being done and a lot of leadership that could be shown, I think that's the place I'd like to see more of these conversations taking place, because it gives people a renewed sense of hope. I mean, we have so much within us that we're not tapping into, and I think hope is a big part of it. Not in the religious sense at all, just in the human spirit sense, just in a renewal and a revival of the human spirit. So thank you for organizing this and having me on.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Zina. I'll just wrap up because it's been incredible. What I just want to wrap up with is, and what Zina said, Donna said, brought all of that up, is working from the heart, working in a heart-based, from our source, from the heart, requires us to tap into our hidden wholeness as individuals, as organizations. And each one of us have that hidden wholeness. Each one of us has that. What has happened is, because of the structures, the systems surrounding us, we lose sight of that hidden wholeness. And this is from Parker Palmer's book. I love his books. I love his book, where he talks about this tree. An oak doesn't want to be a beech. An oak doesn't want to be something else. An oak is an oak. And it doesn't say, oh, am I thin? Am I fat? Am I tall? Am I short? Are my arms quite right? Are they shapely enough? No. They are what they are, and they hold their hidden wholeness with absolute stability, with that belonging to themselves first. And I think as individuals and as organizations, we've forgotten to tap into our hidden wholeness. Even organizations have that wholeness, with what Frederick Laloux calls the evolutionary purpose. So if we were to tap into an organization's evolutionary purpose collectively, we are literally dreaming with the organization, which is a living system, and collectively reimagining it as a whole system. like courage is wholehearted speaking. So collectively, that tapping into the wholeness within each one of us and within us as a collective, as a community, which is an organization, which is a living entity. So all of these together is making me dream of organizations as whole systems, whole living systems, that more such conversations can help us to create the foundational narratives for such systems to take root. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary, for holding this space, for creating this sacred container. Thank you.
I'm not very often speechless, but all I can say is I'm just humbled by each of you showing up. I'm humbled for anyone that watches this, watches back. Like, this is not utopia. This is not some fluffy, sit on a cloud, monk type activity, whether you're a monk or not. Like, regular business thinks this is woo-woo. This is not woo-woo. This is possible for every single one of us. And this is what I'm taking away. If we allow ourselves to slow down, if we allow ourselves to connect to ourselves, one another, and to understand systems more deeply, everything shifts, and so bloody quickly. That's what I'm excited about, is like the potentiality that each of you have expressed today. None of this is you need to invest. You don't need to get McKinsey in. You don't need to get Capgemini in. You don't need EY for 24 months. Like, I'm not saying don't use those people. I'm saying, what about those you're already paying salaries to? What about those that are at the edge of your system that you never hear from? Like, how about inviting them in, slow down, get present, and truly develop, a truly emergent, inclusive culture from the inside out? It feels so real. I really feel like we've modeled that it's possible today. And that's what I'm most excited about. But that slowing down bit, that's almost like a cancer in senior leaders' ears. But guess what? I had testicular cancer. Trust me, deal with slowing down. It's way better than having cancer. I'm not sure if that's some sort of new party political broadcast, people, but it just sort of just came out. Very random linkage. But I'm feeling intuitively, I want to do one more quick round, then we'll say goodbye. 2 or 3 words as we leave. Popcorn style, starting with Donna. 2 or 3 words as you're checking out.
Yeah, I can't quite do 2 or 3 because just something you said triggered. Woo-woo is the file that they put everything they don't understand in.
Yeah.
So, 10 years ago, quantum physics was in the woo-woo file. It's not anymore. So it's gotten out of the file. It's like, oh, so this is the exciting part, is that little file called woo-woo is one by one, we'll pluck out the concepts that got tossed in that file and take a better look at them and understand that the soft skills that the C-suite is so afraid of is actually, they're much harder to master. That's why they are called soft skills, because we can dismiss them that way. But the real part of it is stepping into the soft skills, because that's where the leadership is. That's where it sits, in the thick of that.
For me, I would just say, just start to observe what you normalize.
I'll repeat what you said, Gary. Times are urgent. Let us slow down.
And for me, and it's a challenge to me, be grateful for where you are in this moment, whatever's going on. Because I don't do that enough. And there's a lot of potential in that. Thanks, everyone. Join us next time. Zaina, you're amazing. Donna, you're amazing. Shahana, you're amazing. Gary, you're not so bad yourself. Almost positive. Have a very, very good rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.